This is the first video for the Year 10 Linguistics unit, and the focus for this video is on situational context. Situational context is all the factors that we consider when we communicate, all the building blocks that impact on the language choices we make, whether we're writing or we're speaking, depending on a few different factors like audience, the topic, and the function or purpose of our text and why we're communicating. As we go through the video, you might need to pause to enable you to be able to take notes. You will need to write down the definitions of all the topics covered and the examples and any other notes that might help you. So feel free to pause when you need to or when I instruct you to. You can handwrite, you can type, you can use all different types of note-taking functions. It's up to you to decide what works for you. At the end, however, make sure that you transfer your notes into the meta-language glossary table, which you'll be able to find in Canvas. So, what is situational context? Well, there are 5 elements that make up situational context: function, field, mode, setting, and relationship. Function is explained in a separate video called The Functions of Language. So make sure once you finish this video, you go and watch that one. So after function, the next contextual factor is field, which is the focus or the topic of the communication. You can see on your screen that there are 3 sets or groups of words: spoon, simmer, chop, dice, wet, rainy, morning mist, clearing, and pig, horse, sheep, and fence. I want you to pause the video, write those down, and then work out what the category or topic is, essentially the field of each of those groups of words. So hopefully what you've come up with is that spoon, simmer, chop, and dice come from the field of cooking. Perhaps you said something like kitchen, or you had cooking techniques. That's all fine. Sometimes we can have more than one field, and as long as we're in the right direction, there might not be one set word you need to use. Wet, rainy, morning mist, or clearing, you might have said weather, you might have said rain, you might have even have said winter. And then for pig, horse, sheep, and fence, you've probably said something like farm. Following field, we have the mode and the discourse form. There are 3 modes: written, spoken, and signed, or spoken, written, and signed. We're not going to focus on signed in this unit, only spoken and written, and particular elements of spoken and written. So there are 3 modes: spoken, written, signed. Each of those modes has different discourse forms. Discourse forms, fancy name for text type, and they are endless. On your screen there is a short list: letter, speech, SMS conversation, phone call, email, advertisement, article, PowerPoint, textbook, conversation between TV host and contestant, political campaign material, the back of the cereal box. Essentially, our discourse forms are endless. You want to make sure you're as specific as possible with the discourse form because there are so many types or forms. We then have setting. So this is the physical location of the text. For example, we could have an article in an online newspaper. So if you go to theage.com.au, you could have a conversation between a teacher and student in the classroom, or a speech by a politician in Parliament in Canberra. For each of these settings, it will impact the language choices we make. A conversation between a teacher and a student in the classroom is going to be different between a conversation and a teacher held in a cafe at the weekend when you awkwardly bump into each other, or even when you're passing each other in the corridor. So the setting is going to impact the language choice. Think about a speech given by a politician in Parliament. What language choices would we expect them to make? We would expect them to be formal. We would expect them to use sophisticated language. So we do have to think about the physical setting of where the text or the discourse might be found. The final contextual factor is the relationship between the participants. Again, you want to be as specific as possible and to narrow these down. So we could have a journalist and the interviewee, mother and daughter, colleague, etc. You can read the screen. Again, much like our discourse forms, these can be endless. I want you to pause the video here, and once you've taken down your notes, look at each of the scenarios and consider how their relationship might impact on the language choices used. For instance, with the journalist and the interviewee, a journalist is likely to be polite, especially if their relationship is unknown or unfamiliar with the person they're interviewing. So they're going to be polite. They're probably going to be quite direct with their questions, but they're going to make sure that they're not trying to overwhelm the person that they're interviewing. So pause the video, work out the language choices between the mother and daughter, colleague and colleague, principal and student, boss and employee, advertiser and consumer. So let's quickly run through a few of these. The mother and the daughter, the relationship between them will impact their language choice depending on how close they are and the function of their communication. With the colleagues, again, it might depend on how well they know each other. If I don't know one of my fellow teachers that well, am I likely to walk up to them and use slang, perhaps use words that they're unfamiliar with? Most likely not. I'm going to be polite. I'm not going to be completely formal, but I'm going to think about maintaining our professional relationship. How about the principal and the student? I would hope that when you're addressing a principal, there would be terms of respect. Again, it would be quite a polite conversation, and that it would involve a fairly even exchange between the two participants. So there are a couple of different ways that we can describe the relationship between participants, because we not only want to say what the relationship is, we want to explain why they're communicating together. So it could be to establish solidarity. Solidarity means that you are trying to understand each other, you have a common interest. So often you'll establish solidarity with your friends when you sit down at lunchtime and discuss what's happened in class. You might like to build rapport. So sometimes in a relationship and in a conversation or within a text, you will build rapport. And rapport means basically like a close relationship with someone else. You're trying to understand them better. It's a step further than solidarity. You don't have to be friends with someone in order to build rapport. For those of you who have a job who work in customer service, to make a good sale, you probably need to build rapport with your customers. So you need to understand their feelings or ideas, you need to communicate well, and you want to be seen as polite and interested in what they have to say. So we often want to build rapport with everyone. The relationship might create social distance, or it might establish social distance. So it's going to separate our groups of people. It could create an in-group or an out-group. So do you want, or does the creator of the text want people to feel part of their group or excluded? It can create intimacy and show a close relationship. Or we can use a text or conversation to establish or reinforce power, hierarchy, and equality. So, aside from function, which I've said comes in a different video, we've gone through all the factors of situational context. A mnemonic device to help you remember this is funky field mice sit and relax. So funky is function, field is field, mice is mode, sit is the setting, and relax is the relationship. Funky field mice sit and relax. That's what you need to know for situational context. Last thing you need to do for situational context before we can move on is to check your understanding. So pause the video here, have a go at answering the questions, and then the answers are on the next slide. So the topic of the discourse, or of any discourse, is called the field. 3 things you could consider when explaining the relationship between the participants is the purpose of the relationship. Are they building rapport, establishing solidarity? You could also explain the role, so it's a journalist and interviewee. And then recipe, phone call, article, and SMS conversations are all examples of discourse forms. Your teacher will go through some of the other answers that you could have had in class. Make sure you now move on to watch the functions video.